Hey, everybody. Let's talk about a resource that's available for election violence prevention. This one is so cool. I am genuinely really excited to tell you about this. This is something called the Braver Angels Trustworthy Elections Report. Braver Angels Trustworthy Elections Report. It starts out like this. Basically, in our country, we have this situation where we think that there is a conflict that's unsolvable. Generally speaking, conservatives in our country think that our election process has a security problem. And generally speaking, in our country, liberals think that our election process has an access problem. And so the question that Braver Angels as an organization was asking is it true that these two concepts, security problem and access problem, are mutually in conflict? We've been assuming this for a long time. Like, you can't solve the security problem and make the election safer without cracking down on access. And you can't solve the access problem and make the elections more accessible without causing a problem for security. That's what people have been thinking. And Braver Angels said, does it seem possible that actually these problems can be solved at the same time? So they held this series of workshops, and each of the workshops was half red, half blue. That's a Braver Angels thing. You have to have the half conservative, half liberal group of people getting together. So they brought together these groups and they said, you need to come up with a list of recommendations for fixing our elections. And the trick is that every recommendation that you make as a group has to be approved word for word by everybody who was physically present in the room. So again, this is a combination of Democrats and Republicans, or blue-leaning and red-leaning people. And they're trying to come up with a series of recommendations that they can all collectively affirm. Then they took the recommendations that came out of these workshops, and there were hundreds of them, not hundreds of workshops, hundreds of recommendations. And then they gave them to a synthesizing group. The synthesizing group was also half blue, half red. And the synthesizing group had to create a final report that they all approved, every word. And also, they weren't allowed to come up with new stuff. So it had to come out of the data that started in the workshops. The synthesizing group was not allowed to just skip over the workshops. They had to actually take those recommendations. The final report's recommendation have several broad categories, and they cover everything from how the elections are administered to how the election districts are made, addressing things like gerrymandering, to election monitoring, and a whole bunch of other pieces. And then they just said, like, these are the things that can work for us. What I found really amazing when the Braver Angels Trustworthy Elections report came out was that they had this fireside chat. And that's what they call it when they have a conversation. Braver Angels says it's a fireside chat, and they stream these so that you can see people talking about the experience that they've had. You can actually go back and watch the fireside chat from when they released the Trustworthy Elections report. And what I loved about the conversation was that the people on the synthesizing group were saying that they'd had this transformative experience, that they got into a room, well, a metaphorical room. They were mostly on Zoom, but they got into a conversation with people on the other side of the political spectrum and talked about the elections and how to solve them. And they discovered that when they made this mutual commitment to actually listen and actually commit to finding agreement together, that eventually they were usually able to do it. They didn't come to unanimity on every imaginable point, but they came to unanimity on a lot. And they discovered that they could find ways forward that affirmed everybody's point of view and didn't threaten anybody's deepest beliefs. So there's this report, and it's not all that long. It's maybe, I don't know, 18, 20 pages long. It's not a 500-page document. But Braver Angels is actually not all that big of an organization, and they have a lot of volunteer staff. So they don't necessarily have the ability to get this report out to every corner of the internet and into the hands of every elected official and every media channel. So what they're asking people to do, and I want to transfer this ask on to you, is to gather people together to talk about the Trustworthy Elections report. Have discussion group conversations, read it, discuss it, find, what resonates for you in it, see what you can learn from it. And then take the report to elected officials. And if possible, do this in bipartisan teams. So whichever side of the political spectrum you come from, find somebody who's your opposite and then walk this report into your representative's office together and say, hey, we together from opposite ends of the spectrum want you to take this report seriously because this is a way forward that works for everybody in our country. Use whatever channels are available to you to talk about it. Use your social media channels, use actual media channels, like hop on to a local radio station or a newspaper or whatever you have access to. Why does this fall into the category of election violence prevention? Here's why. It's because, as we've talked about, one of the problems that is most likely to cause violence is if people are doubting that the election is legitimate. People who doubt their government has been legitimately elected are much more likely to feel that violence is necessary to correct that problem. So it's really important that the elections are fair and the elections are also perceived as fair. We want everybody to believe that the elections are working well. And that's why this strategy matters so much, because this report takes it from all sides of the equation and says, if we do all of the things on this list, then we can make this work for everybody. That's why this is an election violence prevention strategy, because it is causing the elections to be both fair and perceived as fair by people from across the political spectrum. Next time we talk, we'll do another support for conversation, and it'll be something called the engagement dials from Monica Guzman. That's next time.